Adolf Hitler caused the deaths of 50 million people. An entire nation followed him to ruin. He was hated by those he persecuted and even by some of his own commanders. Yet in 25 years, no one managed to kill him. Winston Churchill had very few bodyguards, whilst Hitler had thousands. He needed them. During his travels across Europe, there were over 40 attempts on his life. Now, with access to captured original SS records, the producers of Churchill's Bodyguard can reveal for the first time in this new series how fate and a small number of hand-picked bodyguards helped this evil genius to cheat death on so many occasions. Why did no one manage to kill Adolf Hitler? Enough people wanted to, but as this series shows, it was not as simple as it sounds, even in Hitler's earliest days as a minor, rabble-rousing street politician. After Germany's catastrophic defeat in 1918, soldiers streamed back from the Western Front full of anger and frustration. They believed they had been let down by their own government, forced into a humiliating peace, stabbed in the back. One of these soldiers was 29-year-old Corporal Adolf Hitler. He had served as a frontline messenger in the 16th Bavarian Infantry and had been lucky to survive the war. He was wounded twice. In October 1918, during fighting south of Ypres, a gas shell exploded near Hitler, blinding him. He spent 3 months in hospital and emerged into a Germany in turmoil. With no job or profession to go to, Hitler hung around his old regiment in Munich and was given the task of spying on political party meetings. Germany had a new democratic government, the Weimar Republic, but this faced horrendous problems. With inflation spiraling out of control, many, like Emil Klein, doubted whether it could survive.
Wenn ich dann denke, dass ich da 4 Billionen für eine Wurstsemmel bezahlt habe, ne? Das war schon ein Zusammenbruch. Denn die Leute haben gesagt, so kann es nicht weitergehen. Und dann ging es langsam an mit der Diskussion, da muss ein starker Mann muss kommen. Und das wurde immer stärker, die Sache nach dem starken Mann, weil die Demokratie nichts zu Wege brachte.
Amid the chaos, communists clashed with nationalists and socialists. War veterans formed armed groups that shot at each other on the streets. It looked as though the country was on the verge of civil war. Hitler was excited by the anarchy and formulated his own political beliefs, mainly based on a growing hatred of Jews and Marxists, who nationalists like Fridolin von Spahn thought wanted to destroy Germany.
Sodass natürlich in Deutschland allmählich der Eindruck entstand, ja, Bolschewismus und Judentum ist dasselbe, so ungefähr. Dass sich allgemein eine anti-jüdische Stimmung verbreitet hat, das finde ich sehr natürlich.
One of the political groups Hitler spied on was the National Workers' Party. But rather than inform on it, he joined it. And within 2 years, he had taken it over, giving it a new name, the National Socialist German Workers' Party. The Nazis had been born. When he joined this group, it had only 54 members, but his fiery talent for public speaking soon attracted many more. Some, like Emil Klein, against their better judgment.
Wenn ich ganz ehrlich bin, und das wissen auch Freunde von mir, denen ich das schon oft gesagt habe, von Mensch zu Mensch, Hitler hat vom Antlitz zum Antlitz, war ich eigentlich von ihm mit seinem Schnauzbart gar nicht begeistert. Aber er konnte mich begeistern durch die Kraft seiner Rede. Und er konnte mich nicht nur begeistern, sondern hat mich auch überzeugt. Und das ist anscheinend bei allen gelungen.
Hitler had finally found a purpose to his life. But politics in the Weimar Republic were dangerous. In the first 3 years after the war, there were 380 political assassinations in Germany. Fights in beer halls and clubs were the norm. Fists, knuckle dusters, knives, metal poles were the preferred weapons. But guns and grenades were available too. If Hitler was going to survive in his new career, he had to protect himself from rival political gangs. Like any mobster chief, he needed hard men to look out for him. And these were readily available from the ex-soldiers attracted by Hitler's rabble-rousing speeches. His first security unit was called the Ordner-Truppe, the steward's troop, made up of tough veterans. Since the formation of paramilitary groups had been outlawed, they had to call themselves the Gymnastics and Sports Division of the new Nazi Party to avoid being arrested. The first members of the Ordner-Truppe were key figures in Hitler's personal security. They would become his most trusted bodyguards and would follow him throughout his career. Ulrich Graf was a 42-year-old butcher by trade. He set up Hitler's first bodyguard, but taking several bullets in one crucial clash soon put him out of action. These were men who knew Hitler's most intimate secrets, and even when their personal traits let them down, Hitler would protect them from the fury of his own party because they had served him well in these early years. One would even be a rival in love with Hitler for the affections of a young woman. Emil Maurice was just 23 years old when he joined Hitler's first protection squad. He went on to become chauffeur to Hitler and a member of his closest bodyguard. A watchmaker by training, Maurice had French family roots and dark good looks, but his background held a secret that would later be used against him. Another early member of this gang of street brawlers was 26-year-old Rudolf Hess, who was later rewarded by being appointed deputy Führer. Because many Nazi political combats took place in beer halls, the Ordner-Truppe became known as the Salzschutz, or hall protection. Then in August 1921, the Sturmabteilung, or SA, was formed. Not a bodyguard, but a paramilitary force intended to win the battle of the streets. The title meant stormtroopers and came from the elite trench-storming troops of World War I. In time, the SA would be equipped with its own military-style uniform and be known as the Brown Shirts. On the 4th of November 1921, Hitler was caught up in a typical brawl that came close to killing him. Talking to a hostile crowd in a beer hall in Munich, he had only 50 SA men to protect him against hundreds of communists. One heckler started the fighting. Then Nazis and Marxists went at each other with knives and clubs. Shots were fired at Hitler on the rostrum, and Hitler fired back with his own pistol. Maurice and Hess were at Hitler's side and were badly injured in the fighting before the police arrived to restore order. Amazingly, no one was killed. Hitler later described the events, praising his closest comrades.
The dance had hardly begun when my storm troops, as they were named from that day forth, attacked. Like wolves, they rushed again and again in groups of 8 or 10 on the enemy. They gradually swept them out of the hall. After 5 minutes, I could hardly see anyone who was not streaming with blood. I was beginning to appreciate their quality. At their head was my splendid Morris. Hess, my private secretary, and many others, though badly hurt, continued to attack as long as their legs could carry them.
Not surprisingly, these pitched battles sometimes led to problems with the police. In another incident, at the Löwenbräu beer keller in 1922, which the Nazis later hushed up, Hitler egged on his thugs to drag a rival speaker off the stage and beat him up. Hitler was arrested and given the minimum 3-month sentence by a sympathetic judge, later reduced to 1 month with the rest on probation. It was this bloody experience of political combat that bound Hitler close to his early bodyguards, a relationship that would endure for most of his life. In these violent and dangerous early days, a key figure in the protection of Adolf Hitler was Ernst Röhm. He would eventually rise to command the SA as his private army, but that was far in the future. In 1920, he was 33 years old. A squat little man with a scarred face, he reveled in the chaos of Weimar Germany. Contrary to his usual brutish image, he was a classic scholar who came from a distinguished family of royal officials. In World War I, he proved himself a fearless leader of troops and remained in the small army of the Weimar Republic after the war. This gave him access to secret stores of army weapons, which he slipped to the nationalist Freikorps. In 1920, Röhm joined the Nazi Party and became one of Hitler's closest friends. He hoped to organize the first units of the SA, recruiting young, enthusiastic men who had missed out on the war, in addition to war veterans. Typical of these was Bruno Gescher, a natural brawler who was just 17 years old when he joined the Nazi Party in 1922. Sacked from a series of jobs every time his SA membership was discovered, Gescher remained loyal and eventually became the head of Hitler's personal bodyguard. The SA in the early years was run on a purely volunteer basis. Kurt Lüdecker was an early member, and many years later wrote about the difficulties of organizing and kitting out the first units. Short of money, it was difficult to find equipment for them.
Most of our material was stored in my apartment. Not much was new, but all was in fine condition. Germany was filled with the debris of the war: uniforms, implements, even arms, which had been sold by soldiers or stolen after the armistice from immense army depots. It was easy to get military goods, but not to get them undamaged. I solved the problem by keeping 2 Jewish dealers constantly on the lookout for what we needed.
This included searching for weapons. Arms had been banned for the civilian population in Weimar Germany, and their possession could lead to several years in jail. But the political parties on the fringes needed them to instill fear into their opponents and to protect themselves.
It was no easy task to obtain weapons and keep them in secret. Arms were being bootlegged, and it was an exciting business. One had to risk danger 100 times to find a single weapon that was intact and not rusted.
By the end of December 1922, about 100 men had enlisted under Lüdecker, and some 40 regular army soldiers had pledged themselves to him in secret.
All possessed complete uniforms, with steel helmets and field outfits. Outside Munich, I had managed to secure and hide 15 heavy Maxim guns, more than 200 hand grenades, 175 perfect rifles, and thousands of rounds of ammunition. A real arsenal.
In late 1922, another major figure entered the close circle of Hitler's personal security. The flamboyant 29-year-old Hermann Göring was a minor aristocrat. He started World War I as an infantry officer, but soon transferred to the most exciting unit to serve with, the pioneering Air Force. Starting as an observer, Goering qualified as a fighter pilot in October 1915. He was soon an ace, winning the coveted Pour le Mérite, the German equivalent of the Victoria Cross, and commanding the Richthofen Squadron, the legendary Red Baron's flying circus, by the end of the war. When Goering joined the Nazi Party, Hitler was delighted. Here was a true war hero who could lead his veterans into political combat. He put him in charge of the fledgling SA based in Munich. A correspondent from the London Times described the appearance of Hitler's early armed followers. Many of these storm troops are lads of from 17 to 20, but professionals and businessmen, ex-officers, students and farmers can be seen in the ranks. Recently, Hitler's men have been equipped with steel helmets of the regulation government pattern, presumably surplus war material that was supposed to have been destroyed long ago. These political gangsters were not allowed to carry weapons in public, such as knuckle dusters or knives. But in spite of this, every active member of the Hitler organization carries a flexible steel truncheon covered with rubber. In May 1923, shortly after Goering took command of the SA, the Ordnertruppe was replaced as Hitler's personal bodyguard by the Stabswache, or Headquarters Guard. Numbering just 20 men, it was soon renamed Stosstrupp Hitler, Hitler's shock troop. These chosen men wore a different uniform to the rest of the SA, field grey jackets and breeches. On their heads, they wore grey ski caps with a silver death's head button. This skull would become the sign of the most notorious of Nazi organizations, the SS, and many historians date its beginning from this bodyguard unit. The chilling death's head insignia was not invented by the Nazis, but copied from the badges of long-established cavalry regiments. It was probably because of its association with elite Prussian hussars that Hitler adopted it, wanting his bodyguards to be considered the elite of his party. The first great test for this Nazi bodyguard came in January 1923, when the Weimar government postponed the payment of war reparations. In retaliation, the French occupied the Ruhr, the country's industrial heartland. Their heavy-handed tactics caused a general strike and widespread resentment. Hitler had recently been emboldened by the support of the World War I hero, General Erich Ludendorff. He decided to exploit the chaos by launching a coup d'etat during a political meeting in a Munich beer hall, being addressed by the Bavarian Prime Minister Gustav von Kahr. It would be a tremendous political and personal gamble. If Hitler's putsch failed, at best his political career would collapse. At worst, he might be shot as a traitor. On the 8th of November 1923, at 8 in the evening, Adolf Hitler entered the Munich Bürgerbraukeller. He was armed with a pistol and accompanied by a handful of bodyguards. The Bavarian Prime Minister was speaking. Kurt Lüdecke, one of the SA men with Hitler, described what happened next.
The door was flung open. Steel-helmeted men burst through, pushing Maxim guns into the hall. Other steel helmets appeared menacingly at every window. Hitler seized his revolver and elbowed his way forward through the crowd behind his heavily armed bodyguard. Hitler jumped up on a table and fired 2 shots into the ceiling, demanding quiet. In an instant, The stillness was absolute. One could even hear Hitler breathing hard. He shouted to the audience, "The national revolution has begun. 600 armed men are covering the hall."
In truth, there were only 60. It was a daring bluff. Meanwhile, Ernst Röhm took several hundred SA troopers to seize control of the Bavarian military headquarters. Next morning, Hitler and his supporters decided to march to the city centre to rally the citizens to their cause. It was a dull, cold day, and 2,000 Nazis formed a column with Hitler and Ludendorff at the head. Goering walked beside Hitler with Ulrich Graf on the other side. There was no band, and the column advanced quietly and somberly. A police barrier on one of the bridges across the river Isar was brushed aside. And when the column reached the Marienplatz, it was greeted by cheering crowds. Hitler and Ludendorff were not sure what to do next. But when they heard that the army had turned on Röhm and his brown shirts, they decided to march to their rescue. As the Nazis reached the end of the narrow street leading into the Odeonplatz, they were blocked by a line of armed state police near the Feldherrenhalle War Memorial. Ulrich Graf stepped forward. He shouted that General Ludendorff was marching with them and there was no need for any shooting. But as Emil Klein described, the police ignored him.
Wir kommen dann in die Maximilianstraße, die überkreuzen wir. Und wie ich dann an die Ecke der Residenz komme, hören wir die Schüsse fallen.
The reality was less heroic than this dramatic Nazi painting. A man beside Hitler fell dead, dragging him down and dislocating his arm. Graf threw himself in front of Hitler and took several bullets intended for his leader. Goering was hit in the thigh and collapsed. Only Ludendorff remained unscathed, marching on through the police line to be arrested. When the shooting stopped, 14 Nazis and 4 policemen lay dead. Hitler avoided the flying bullets and was dragged away from the carnage by his bodyguards, but arrested 2 days later. Following his narrow escape in the Putsch, the Nazi Party, the SA, and the Stosstrup were all banned. It looked like the end of the line for Hitler and his followers. But the attempted coup catapulted Hitler to fame. He used his trial to project his beliefs into the national newspapers, making clear that he was trying to save the nation from the disasters of the Weimar Republic. Unlike Ludendorff, who claimed at the trial that he was an unwitting participant, Hitler portrayed himself as a man of destiny who was proud of his actions. The judges were clearly sympathetic and gave him a lenient sentence. 5 years, but with the possibility of parole after just 6 months. Hitler now had a national stage for his politics and used his time in jail to set out his beliefs. In Landsberg prison, the regime was lax, and Hitler was free to associate with Rudolf Hess and Emil Maurice. They took notes as he composed his Nazi manifesto, Mein Kampf. He also pondered 2 lessons from the failed putsch. The first was that street fighting was not enough. He would have to use the democratic system to achieve power. Only then could he dismantle it. The other lesson was more brutal. The violence and sacrifice of that day in Munich convinced him more than ever that he needed a loyal bodyguard. A group of protectors that would risk their own lives, as Graf had done, and would, in his words, even march against their own brothers. Hitler served just over a year for high treason. As he re-entered German politics, he had to resurrect his party machinery and his bodyguard. They must be stronger, more efficient, more vicious than ever before. Five days before Christmas 1924, Hitler was met outside Landsberg prison by his photographer friend Heinrich Hoffmann. He was a free man and posed beside his friend's car. Hitler should have been happy, but he knew he had a mountain to climb. His style of extreme politics suited a time of crisis, but the Weimar Republic had managed to stabilize the economy. The threat of revolution and civil war had passed. This was the Roaring Twenties, and Germans enjoyed a new prosperity. They had no time for political fanatics, and although Hitler tried to behave like a legitimate politician, his party lost votes whenever there was an election. In Munich, the city the Nazis had nearly taken in 1923, the party had fewer than 700 members. Hitler now lived the life of a bohemian, living off the royalties from Mein Kampf and using them to buy a villa near Berchtesgaden, on a slope of the Obersalzberg. This would eventually become the Berghof, the most heavily defended private residence in Germany. But for the moment, there were few threats against a man who was thought to be yesterday's hero. The reformed Nazi Party was small but radical, and this soon led to a substantial problem for Hitler. For as he reconstructed the SA, Hitler's political views diverged steadily from those of Ernst Röhm, the hard man who had led the brown shirts against the army in Munich. Röhm had always loathed the German political and military establishment and wanted the SA to become a mass revolutionary movement which could overthrow it by force. Hitler was no longer interested in such ideas and ordered him to either submit or resign. Röhm chose to resign as head of the SA and ended up sailing to Bolivia to become a military advisor. The SA was now put under the command of a retired army captain, Franz Pfeffer von Salomon. By 1927, its membership had risen to 10,000. At the same time, Hitler's bodyguard, the Stabswache, was recreated. Numbering just 8 men, including Emil Maurice, it was led by Julius Schreck, who also served as Hitler's chauffeur. The Stabswache was soon renamed the Schutzstaffel, the SS, Hitler's protection squad. Its members now wore black caps with the death's head insignia. The SS was subordinate to the much more numerous SA, but its members acted like an elite. There were stricter entrance requirements than the general SA, and it maintained tighter discipline. These special demands attracted ambitious brown shirts like Bruno Gescher. After a Nazi Party rally in 1927, he was so impressed by the appearance of the early SS that he left the SA to join it. By 1929, it numbered 280 men. That year, Heinrich Himmler was made Reichsführer SS. It proved Hitler's most important appointment among the many people that devoted their lives to protecting him, and one which would cost the lives of millions. Himmler would soon become one of the most feared men in Nazi Germany and turn the SS into a massive and sinister organization that included most of Hitler's security units. He also set a pattern of Nazi infighting that seriously compromised the efficiency of Hitler's overall bodyguard. Himmler was 23 years old when he joined the Nazi Party and served as a flag carrier for Röhm during the Beer Hall Putsch. Following Hitler's release from prison, Himmler became a Nazi regional leader, but lack of funds forced him to drift through several jobs, eventually becoming a chicken farmer. Given the chance to head the SS, Himmler ruthlessly turned it into a major force within the Nazi Party. By the end of 1929, he had expanded its membership to 1,000. It was also in 1929 that the prosperity of the Jazz Age was shattered by the Wall Street crash. Weimar Germany was plunged into another economic depression. Mass unemployment once again sowed the seeds of discontent. What was bad for Germany was excellent for Hitler and the Nazis. The SA immediately began a massive recruitment drive to take advantage of the mass of unemployed men, and many new recruits like Wolfgang Teubert were ready to flock to them.
Ich bin gern dazu gegangen, weil ich mir sagte, das ist das Einzigste, was jetzt noch in Frage kommt. Das war deshalb schon aufregend, weil die eigene Familie natürlich nicht dulden wollte, dass man im Braunhemd draußen herummarschierte und Strahlschutz betrieb.
In elections held in 1928, the Nazi Party had barely managed to win 12 seats in the Reichstag. With Germany teetering on the edge of a new economic disaster, voters swung away from center politics to the extremes. The Nazis' election machine was now in full swing, presenting Hitler as the strong man that Germany desperately needed. The Nazis had few detailed policies. The focus was on Hitler, the leader. In 1930, the revived Nazis won 6 million votes, giving them 107 seats in the Reichstag and making them the second biggest party in Germany. It was a dramatic turnaround for Hitler, and as a result, money flowed into Nazi campaign coffers from supportive businessmen. But just as the Nazi vote had gone up, so had that of their most deadly rivals, the Communists. They were only 30 seats behind. They were not afraid to fight fire with fire and were happy to take the battle back onto the streets.
Aber wir hatten natürlich auch Zusammenstöße, aber wir hatten ja keine Waffen. Also mit dem Schlagen konnten wir nur höchstens uns verteidigen und den Gegner selbst mit Fäusten bearbeiten, wo es notwendig war. Und das war schon öfters notwendig. Und im Saal dann die Stühle zerschlagen und mit den Stuhlbeinen kämpfen, das kam öfters vor. Machten auch beide Parteien natürlich, die einen wie die anderen.
Hitler needed his SA more than ever. But at this critical moment came a challenge from within its ranks. Angered by the apparently lavish lifestyles of the party leadership, including the purchase of an extravagant new headquarters in Munich, the Brown House, SA men in Berlin, led by their deputy leader Walter Stennes, occupied the party's headquarters. Hitler was forced to accept many of their demands for better pay and conditions, but now declared himself supreme leader of the SA as well as the Nazi Party. Having put down the challenge, Hitler turned to Ernst Röhm for help. Recalled from Bolivia, Röhm became Chief of Staff and effective leader of the SA on the 14th of January 1931, and oversaw its rapid growth to a paramilitary army of 170,000. Unemployment helped fill its ranks with aggressive young men. They beat the communists on the streets, and capitalist backers were happy to see them doing it. The Nazis were not exactly lovers of capitalism. They were, after all, a socialist party. But Hitler knew he had to keep on friendly terms with big business to get into power. But Röhm was still an extreme revolutionary. He fought the communists because they were rivals, not because he liked capitalism. Although Röhm delivered Hitler a victory on the streets, his revolutionary beliefs soon reignited serious tensions between the two men. There was also a rising tension between Röhm and his nominal subordinate Himmler. Both of them craved to become the exclusive protector of the Führer. In late 1930, after the Stennis revolt, the ever-devious Himmler had persuaded Hitler to make the SS independent of the SA. SA officers could no longer give orders to anyone in the SS. But when Röhm took up command of the SA, Himmler suffered a blow and was declared to be his subordinate. Despite this, barely a month later, Röhm issued orders putting Himmler in charge of the Sicherheitsdienst, the SD or security service, which would be responsible for protecting Hitler and other leading members of the party. The SS now wore a completely different uniform to the brown shirts, all black with the SS lightning strike insignia and the death's head. Himmler wanted to poach men from the SA, but Hitler forbade him. SA men had to volunteer for the SS, and strict entrance requirements were imposed. Hitler wanted the SS to be an ultra-loyal, ultra-fit unit, separate from the SA. He saw them as his own police force within the Nazi party. Whereas the SA struck down opposition from outside, the SS could be used to neutralize any opposition within the party, and that included the SA. That the potential threat posed by the SA had not gone away was emphasized by a second incident involving Walter Stennis. Ordered by Hitler to leave Berlin and take up a desk job at the Brown House in Munich, Stennis refused point blank. With his SA supporters, he brushed aside the SS guards and again took over the Berlin HQ. Hitler was furious. Humiliatingly, he was obliged to get the Berlin police to throw them out. In retaliation, Stennis was expelled from the party, but for Hitler, it was a clear warning. Hitler now turned to his loyal SS and instructed Himmler to take charge of security in and around the Brown House. All guards were uniformed, but not allowed to carry conventional weapons. However, they were armed with gas pistols to stun anyone assaulting the building. Despite these divisions within his own party, Hitler was confident that he was on the verge of winning power in Germany. He just had to keep his guard up and his own people under control. That this could all be thrown into jeopardy by a sexual scandal was the last thing he anticipated. But in late 1931, this is exactly what threatened Hitler's grab for power, and the scandal would involve one of his closest and most trusted bodyguards. Munich, 20th of September 1931. A 23-year-old music student was found dead in a second-floor apartment at 16 Prinzregentenplatz. In her hand was a gun. She'd been shot in the heart. The dead woman's nose was broken, and there were other serious injuries to her body. Her name was Angela Raubau, known as Gailey. And what made the story sensational was that the apartment belonged to Adolf Hitler, and so did the gun. Gailey Raubau was his niece, and he had been having a clandestine affair with her. Rumors soon spread around Munich that the death wasn't suicide, but murder, and that she'd been involved in a love triangle with her uncle and his bodyguard, Emil Maurice, one of his oldest and closest companions. Scandal was the last thing Hitler needed at this crucial moment in his career. If the story broke into the national press, it could be the end of his plans to bring the Nazis to power. Gailey had come to live in Hitler's flat in August 1928, when her mother, his half-sister, became his housekeeper. The 40-year-old Hitler soon became infatuated with his young niece. He was extremely possessive, and when she showed interest in Emile Maurice, his bodyguard and one of his closest companions, the tension grew. On the 24th of December 1928, Gailey wrote to Maurice.
The postman has always brought me 3 letters from you, but never have I been so happy as I was over the last few days. Uncle Adolf is insisting we should wait for 2 years. Think of it, Emil. 2 whole years of only being able to kiss each other now and then, and always having Uncle Adolf in charge.
Not surprisingly, Maurice had soon been sacked. Hitler admitted to his friend Heinrich Hoffmann, who later became his official court photographer, that he loved Gailey and thought of marrying her. But he felt he must remain single for the sake of his political career. He was also attracted to a teenage girl working in Hoffmann's photographic studio, Eva Braun. If Hitler was jealous of Gailey's male friends, then she may have been jealous of Braun. On the 18th of September 1931, Gailey told Hitler that she wanted to leave and go to Vienna. They had a row, and Hitler stormed out of the apartment. Gailey, left alone, shot herself through the heart with his revolver. When he heard the news, Hitler was distraught. But Gailey's body was reported to be badly battered. Hitler was known for his outbursts of angry violence. And at this stage in his career, he frequently carried, and on occasions used, a formidable rhino hide whip. Hitler responded to these rumors with a published denial.
It is untrue that I had recurrent disagreements or violent quarrel with my niece, Angela Robal. It is untrue that I was strongly opposed to my niece's traveling to Vienna. The truth is that I was never against the trip my niece had planned to Vienna.
This was enough to get Hitler off the hook of public scandal, but the death of Gailey Rabau marked a turning point in his romantic life. The affair had made him vulnerable both emotionally and politically. His long relationship with Eva Braun never captured the passion he enjoyed with Gailey, but it was safe and secure, and that was what Hitler wanted from now on. For during 1932, he faced his sternest political test, an election campaign to become leader of Germany. But as he crisscrossed Germany, drumming up support for himself and his party, he was exposed to numerous assassination attempts. Standing on podiums and ranting at his audience, he made the perfect target for a lone gunman or ring of plotters with a bomb. He was standing as a candidate for president of the Weimar Republic, but he was up against Field Marshal Paul von Hindenburg. The hero of World War I, Hindenburg represented the old conservative strain of German politics and would not be easily moved. On the 13th of March, Hitler won more than 30% of the popular vote from a disgruntled and fearful population. It was a startling result and meant that Hindenburg did not win an absolute majority. They would have to fight another election. And as Egon Hamstengel later described, once again, it was Hitler's oratory which was the decisive factor.
He had that ability which is needed to make people stop thinking critically and just emote. The ability derived from his readiness to throw himself totally open, to appear, as it were, bare and naked before his audience, to tear open his heart and display it.
Just 2 days after this success, Hitler was traveling by train from Munich to Weimar with his head of propaganda, Josef Goebbels. As they discussed campaign tactics, gunshots struck the side of their carriage. The bullets missed, but it was a clear sign that Hitler's dramatic rise in popularity now made him a prime target. On another dangerous occasion, as he was traveling by car near Freiburg, demonstrators hurled missiles at it. Taking his life in his hands, Hitler jumped out and confronted them, swinging his rhino hide whip. But such action was reckless, and as Hitler ruthlessly pursued his dream of becoming dictator of Germany, he and his old bodyguard comrades needed to take a more professional approach to his protection. It would lead to the creation of one of the most fearsome and evil bodyguard organizations the world has ever seen.